How's it going, guys? So, as you guys might have already saw, they have announced Chapter 16 releasing on the 19th of March. And with new chapter comes new banner. With new banner comes new Shuju Pool. And this time it's going to be Mantra. And it's going to be a really difficult one because I'm actually here to tell you guys to save up and don't pull for Mantra. I know. Me, who's like, oh, just pull everything for IS. Actually, not this time. And we'll have to go further into it. So let's take a look at Mantra. So first of all, let's take a look at Mantra. She is a primal caster, so similar to Nymph and Blaze Altar. And as you guys would know, with these classes, they really work the best with Elemental Burst. And for Mantra, it's going to be working with Tragodia. That kind of limits her a bit more than usual. I'll also have to talk about that a bit later, but let's take a look at her kits first. Okay, so first of all, here is her trait, and this is with module level 3. Without module level, you can see that the trait is just deal arts damage and can deal elemental damage, but with trait it says that dealing damage towards enemy within elemental burst period deals 110% of the damage. So this is pretty good for a basic raise from just module level 1. And then let's take a look at her first talent. The first talent is that whenever an enemy on the field triggers the paralyzed effect, which means when they try to attack and get stopped by the paralyze, they will take 160% of Mantra's damage as elemental damage. So if this was without module, it will be 135. With module, 160%. And whenever paralyze is triggered, there's a 15% chance of paralyze not being consumed. So that's actually really good because, in situations like CC, where you actually do need the paralyze to not go away, you can actually just keep going in and just gamble for the chance. That's one way to use it. Now, if you have module, if you have potential 5, this increases by another 10% elemental damage and another 3% chance to not consume. So it's 170% elemental damage and 18% chance to not consume parallel stack. Second talent is that the nearest red gate, so where enemy appears near Mantra, the nearest one near Mantra, all enemies that appear from that gate will come with one layer of paralyze, and this ignores invisibility. So enemies that are invisible can be selected, which is actually very, very strong. Okay. So that's her base kit, and usually if you do want to use her, I would highly recommend to just stick with module level 1 or level 3. The only reason you want to get to level 3 is because you want to stack that chance to not consume paralyze. If not, you'll get enough damage just from module level 1 because the triggering paralyze increased damage isn't going to increase that much, to be honest. And you'd rather just save some materials for other modules. So that's the base kit for Mantra. First of all, let's take a look at skill 1. Skill 1 is a offensive recovering skill and automatically triggers, and the effect is that the next attack deals up to 325% as arch damage and also carry 30% of that damage as nerval impairment damage. I think that's what's called. And if the enemy is within nerval impairment burst period, then it will also deal an extra 200% of her attack as elemental damage. So this is a really simple AFK skill, but if you really think about it, this is not the best AFK skill. I highly wouldn't recommend anyone to go with this skill. Essentially, if you want to use this skill, you'd probably be better off just rocking Tragodia skill 1. Would be a better AFK skill compared to Mantra's because this is only single target and you're only dealing with one mob at a time with these at best. And it's completely reliant on elemental arch damage. So if enemy has arch resistance, you're dealing less elemental damage at the same time. Just not a good skill highly recommend just don't bother skill mastery with this. So that's skill 1. Next up, we have skill 2. During skill 2 duration, Ventra's attack interval is decreased by 0.8 seconds, and her attack deals up to 240% of her attack as arch damage, and also will chain to 3 other enemies nearby, which deals 120% of Ventra's attack as arch damage at the same time. Each of them will carry 18% of the damage dealt as elemental nerval impairment damage, and also if the enemy is within nerval impairment first, it will also deal 20% of her attack as elemental damage. So essentially, you're not looking at a lot of elemental damage here. You're mainly looking at arch damage, right? So that's the first thing we have to understand. And if we're purely looking at arch damage, this skill does not ignore resistance. And there's so many enemies with resistance nowadays. You're probably better off with just using Logo's skill 3, which, first of all, it can bypass some elemental resistance. Second of all, has better attack area. Third of all, has a better attack mechanic. So in general, Logo skill 3 is much better than this, and you just don't even bother with this skill. And that's how short this skill 2 is going to be, because Logo skill 3, man, much better. But just don't bother with skill mastery. Now, finally, we have skill 3. During skill 3 duration, her attack area is increased to this size, as you can see on the screen, and all enemies within her attack area will lose invisibility, and the max level of her paralysis is down to 2, and that's actually a good thing. Now, her attack is increased by 275%, up to 275%, and will attack 2 targets at the same time. If there is an operator within her attack area that activates a skill, including herself, enemies within that attack area will gain another 2 layer of paralysis, up to 3 times. So you can have 3 different operators activating skills. And enemies within her attack area who has more than 2 layer of paralysis, who gain more than 2 layer, each layer they will take a 185% elemental damage that can hit 2 targets. So it's like chain lightning that only hits 2 targets, and it's the same damage. And there's a slight gap between the jumps, so it's like a I think it's like a 0.1 second delay before it will jump. Now, the really crazy thing about this skill is the raw damage. Obviously, if it's only towards one target, you will only get that 185% for once. But if you have a second target, you're looking at basically double the damage. So essentially, you're looking at 200,000 elemental damage, which at this moment, it is still kind of like true damage-ish. Ignores like dodge, physical and arch dodge, ignores enemies with high resistance, ignores enemies with decreased physical and arch damage taken. 200,000 per target. If you're attacking multiple targets at the same time, it's one target though, it's only around 100k damage, elemental damage, but it is still really good because elemental damage is basically true damage right now. The best thing about this skill is that you can stack a lot more enemies, and then when they all stack up, trigger this skill, and then also bring in Tragodia's skill 3. And oh, by the way, that 100k is with Tragodia's skill 3 in mind. Without Tragodia, this skill is completely useless. So you paired with Tragodia's skill 3, single target 100k, multiple targets 200k for your main target, and the other ones will most likely just die before then. Now, you probably heard the key point, Tragodia's skill 3. And I believe that the majority of us are probably using Tragodia for skill 2 because that is the most impressive skill. The other thing about this is that you can have a bunch of enemies, a bunch of mobs that will, die pretty quickly. And then these chain attacks will usually jump to the nearest target. So if you have like a boss within the center of a circle and around like a few enemies surrounding it, and all the damage jumps to the boss, you can have like way higher damage. That will require great control of enemies positioning and timing and so on. So it's like more like theoretically speaking possible, but that like the chance of that happening is really low, and you'll have to be really good at the game basically. This skill has two issues. First is Tragodia. Second of all is the damage that it deals. It's too much towards a single target or most mobs. First of all, this skill lasts 40 seconds and takes 40 seconds to charge. 40 seconds is way too long, and most enemies do not need that much damage to be killed to begin with. So you're wasting most of the 10 damage potentials within that 40 seconds. What will usually happen is enemies will be dead within like the first 10-20 seconds, and the remaining 20 seconds you'll just be doing nothing. And back at it again, Tragodia, you're usually using Tragodia skill 3 to deal that much damage when you have other operators that can deal good damage as well. Just not worth it. So the only situation where I can see this skill coming in is when enemy has really nasty mechanics like dodge or decreased physical arts damage taken. So especially in cases like CC, remember how CC you have tags where enemies have like ignore some ratio of physical and arts damage taken. That's when this comes in, because true damage is nice, sure, but their total damage generally speaking is much lower compared to elemental damage. So that's about it for skill 3, and I would say if there is one skill that you do want to get to M3, that would be this skill. But in general, I wouldn't recommend pulling Mantra to begin with. And that's skill 3. At last, I want to talk about how she performs in, you know, all sorts of game modes, and to determine if you want to pull her depends on what kind of game mode you want to focus on. So first of all, obviously we talk about your normal events, because that's where most people spend most of the time on the game. And generally speaking, as I mentioned before, she really shines in situations where you want to deal with enemies that have really nasty mechanics that can like negate damage outright, and that's when she really shines. So if you're dealing with like a tricky boss and you just don't have good damage operators, or let's say you only have a very few, she can bypass some of the mechanics, but you have to consider that you have other operators that can deal really good damage to begin with, and that are all-rounders in other fields at the same time that can deal with a lot of like good mobs in a good consistent way with better cooldown and skill duration rotation wise, which they'll just perform much better. So she's more of like a boss killer in that sense, and you have to assume that there will be a lot of mobs around the boss for her to deal the most amount of potential damage that she can do from her skill 3, just because the more damage there is, the more mobs there is, the more damage will be dealt towards the boss. So personally wouldn't recommend pulling her for your normal daily events. Personally speaking, there's always ways to solve mechanics, and sure, you can bypass some with the elemental damage, but I wouldn't consider it to be worth it, especially with how many good operators that are coming down the road. Definitely not. Next up is CC, and I would say CC is probably the only situation right now, even in CN, where I would ever recommend you pulling Mantra. And that is consuming that you will want to be killing the enemy outright instead of permastall. As you know, a lot of CC recently has been permastall, and even if you want to like just outright speed kill all the enemies, it's kind of difficult, and you're probably going to be using Kirby most of the time anyway, because they'll be dealing with a lot more defense enemies, because they want to nerf physical damage. They'll have a lot of defense, and Kirby just does a lot of damage, unless they come up with a CC again with decreased arts damage taken outright. That's when she kind of works, but then you'll also have to put permastall into the equation, because you know Tragodia is pretty good for permastall, not so much for Mantra. There's like a weird balance in the line where Mantra can barely squeeze in, and that's where she shines, because she can ignore many of the tags, debuffs, and so on effects from previous CC. So that's the only place where I would personally recommend if you want to pull Mantra. Next up is definitely IS. So the thing with IS is she really doesn't scale well with any collectibles, and that is kind of a huge issue right now. So as you know, skill 3 is fully reliant on the elemental damage part of things, and then so you have to wait for the elemental burst to recover for her to be able to deal more damage. So it's naturally limited by how much damage she can deal with her skill 3. But that's a huge downside for her, so she doesn't scale well with elemental with attack speed. And then next up, there's things like there's just not a lot of collectibles that scales well with elemental damage right now. It's just not really worth it in both IS5 and IS6, especially in IS6, where you're really focused on if you can, you know, solo clear a lot of stages in boss key, and she's just not equipped with that capability. Not gonna work well in IS6, specifically speaking. Same with IS5. If you're going for King's Collectibles run, it doesn't do anything with King's Collectibles, so you're just wasting your potential there. You're much better off grabbing other operators. So generally speaking, not recommended for IS completely. Next up, let's do RA. So with RA, obviously there's a lot of bosses with like a ton of HP, right? So her skill and her skill 3 plus Tragodia skill 3 combo, it can deal with bosses like up to a certain amount of HP, but anywhere beyond that, we literally just had Sakiko. And if you pulled Sakiko, if you watch my Sakiko Shiju pull video, you would know her damage potential is much higher there. And with RA, you just want the raw damage, so just use Sakiko instead. You'll get much better raw damage and also just better experience in general, to be honest. So yeah, wouldn't pull her for RA, even if you're a huge advocate for RA and you're so excited about new RA coming to CN. Still wouldn't recommend. Next up, we got SSS. So yeah, again, the same issue with SSS. The thing about it is that you gotta pair her with Tragodia skill 3, and that kind of takes away a lot of the usability. The cooldown again is a huge issue. You gotta stack. If you want to stack SP, you gotta stack SP for Mantra and Tragodia, because you want both of their skill to be activated at the same time, which makes it a lot more difficult. So wouldn't recommend for RA. And if you want to do AFK strategy for RA, yeah, it just wouldn't work, would it? Because it's just not good as a AFK operator in general. So that's just Mantra, a great operator who I believe a lot of people really like her. I personally really like her. Like, you know, cool grandma. Who doesn't like a cool grandma? It's just that just not the best in the current environment, and even right now in CN, she just hasn't been used at all. I do feel like it's a missed opportunity, but naturally with these operators that require other operator to work with, they got a kind of a debuff. They're born with a debuff, you know. If you need other operators to work and the other operator is already really good at their own job, Tragodia skill 2, your addition, like, it's not really a good addition to add on someone that makes the timing even tighter and like completely binds your skill 3 with another operator skill 3, which is in the most used skill. Not worth it. So that's it for this video. I hope you guys have learned something or found this video useful and have made up your mind on if you will be pulling Mantra or not. If you do plan on pulling Mantra, I would love to know why and the reasoning behind it. After all my hard work trying to convince you not to, I would love to hear your reasoning. Personally, I will be pulling. As you guys always know, I just pull for everyone anyway, and I will bet on the chance that she might shine in IS7. Maybe it will be elemental damage IS, you never know. So I'll bet on that and I'll still pull. But for the rest of us, maybe just get her off banner someday and hope that goes well. That's it for this video, and I'll see you guys in the video where I'm actually pulling her and get bad luck because I actually tell people not to pull her and Yosta will punish me for it. Yay! See you guys then. Bye.